Thank you for being with us tonight. This meeting has been brought to you in part by
Let Grand Forks International Airport help you start your next vacation off on the right foot. Grand Forks International Airport offers flights to the sunny destinations of Orlando, Las Vegas, and Phoenix on Allegiant, and connections anywhere in the world through Minneapolis-St. Paul on Delta. Forget the hassle of long drives, parking nightmares, and stressful check-ins. The convenience of flying locally means less headaches and more time for you. Grand Forks International Airport. Your airport. Simply grand.
Know what's in this box? Well, in case your crystal ball is broken, here's a hint. Safe, reliable energy, for starters, but there's also a commitment to this community. See, at Xcel Energy, this is our hometown. So we're not just about making a living here, we're about living here. Oh, I wish I had wings. In our community, we're always delivering. Xcel Energy, responsible by nature.
Chris Young, live, Raised on Country Tour.
I was raised on country.
October 3rd, Alaris Center. Chris Young, hit after amazing hit.
And tonight I'm drowning.
With special guests, Eli Young Band and Matt Stell. Tickets on sale now at livenation.com or ticketmaster.com. Chris Young, Raised on Country Tour.
Oh, awesome. All right. With that, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for September 4th, 2019 is called. Roll call.
Here. Johnson. Here. Kuhn. Lee. Munski. Janacek. Here. Reichert. Here. Sandy.
Here.
I heard her, but it's very, very faint. I think we can do with that. Finish roll call. Yep.
Did,
Yes. So with Sandy Korn present, we want to make sure we fix the audio here on that. Megan, can you say test or something?
test. Test. Can you hear me?
She's barely coming through. Sounds like Megan can hear us okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
We will roll forward and then we'll try to get the sound thing straightened out. Megan can always text me if she figures out something's wrong with it. So, reading and approval of minutes from the August 7th meeting, 2019. Questions, Mr. Reichert? Moved by Mr. Reichert, second by Mr. Budke. Discussion, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion, meeting minutes are approved as submitted. Item 3.
Good evening, Commissioners. This has gone through preliminary approval at P&Z as well as City Council. If you recall, this is the plat that the commission chose not to accept the dedicated right-of-way for 43rd Avenue South. And when it did go to the City Council, they approved it with the right-of-way back in, so now it's back for final approval at the Planning and Zoning Commission. Staff did have some feedback from the council as well as some of our original thoughts. And essentially, we think that having this as a dedicated street is going to be in the better interest of the city. It's at the intersection of a high-volume major arterial roadway. The city will be investing probably right around $400,000 in the signal as well as the turn lane. It's the only full intersection, and I'll switch to a different map here. This may not be the exact build out, but it is the only full intersection between 40th Avenue South and 47th, with the other two remaining intersections restricted to three-quarter access. The cost of the road will be assessed to the adjoining property owners. And in part, like most other city streets, the maintenance, snow removal, all those sorts of things come from the property taxes that are paid on the property. So essentially, we just look at it as basically it's going to look like a city street. It's going to function somewhat as a city street as it's taking in larger volumes of traffic to service both the south side of where 43rd is as well as the north. And the developer said he would be here. He wasn't able to speak to the commission at the last meeting. And Mr. Morris is here, so I guess I would like to turn it over to Mr. Morris to address the commission.
I'd like to maybe have the commission ask you a question.
Sure.
Before we kind of move it to the owner of the property. I think there probably was a couple pulling me on this. So Mr. Rager, go ahead.
Yeah, looking at this map that you have up right there, it looks like there's not going to be a townhouse at the end of the loop. Is that right?
No, this, again, this is an older rendering. It's the only one that we had. I just wanted to highlight the roadway. If you look on the plat, all the lots are platted as such, so there won't be any opening. There'll actually be a structure where the opening is otherwise shown on this schematic.
Okay. My question, Brad, before we move forward, just looking at this, is so then Star Avenue, to the north of it, is that going to be a city street also entering that property there?
To the north where I'm...
Nope, down the north of 43rd, so yeah, right there where your hand is.
No, that will remain just a driveway. Right in, right out, and left in.
Okay. Any other questions for Brad before we, I guess we kill two birds with one stone here, we will public hearing here from the developer. So I was trying to do. Any other questions for Brad before we bring up? At this time, I'll open the public hearing and we'll, I would say invite the developer to come up during the public hearing. We can go that. So just please state your name and stuff for the record again.
Austin Morris, Enclave Development.
Okay.
So on the, just to give some color and history, this has been probably about a year and a half in the making. We've had 2 neighborhood meetings and worked hard to design it so that we could have friendly neighbor relations and ensure that this large, I think it's about a $25 million development overall, master plan community. Through that process, the city asked us to required a traffic study in order to determine whether warrants would be granted for a future traffic light at 43rd. And the traffic study did provide those warrants in the future. And the 43rd Avenue just providing history again is 43rd Avenue was going to be a through street plan for the last couple decades as going through to South 25th. So the only reason we eliminated the through was to have the neighborhood enjoy the development to the extent that they could. They didn't want the through traffic. So in the end, 43rd Avenue would be designed as a city street, city spec, would be special assessed to our properties, and our properties would pay the special assessments and pay for the road via that special assessment district. And based on the total square footage of developed area and the office park and then the future retail to the north, 43rd ends up being the collector to the future traffic light. The other entrances, one to the north and one accessing Star, those would just be private drives like you'd see at many retail developments to provide further circulation for the tenants and the customers. So that's kind of the overall history. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you guys have.
Mr. Riker. Yeah, looking at the old rendering, I think you don't have a new one, but now if this is going to end, it looks to me like it would end at about the east driveway there. Would that be about right?
Let me see. So the Yep. So the current design, which was reviewed by engineering and Brian Pattengale, our engineer on this project, the design of this road would end shy of where it's shown in the rendering. So it'd end on our property and provide that, I don't know the correct term for it, but provide that sort of roundabout.
My next question, and maybe planning and zoning or Mr. Grasser can answer this, is there any reason to have a circle at the end of it then, if you're going to have driveways to the north and the south?
Yep, that's the correct one.
Nitpicky, but it seems like we probably don't need that circle there then, do we?
In terms of the street itself, on the one hand, without it, it's considered a dead end, which in code we try not to plat dead ends. Also, it is, pardon?
It's still a dead end.
Well, with the cul-de-sac, it provides that access, and it's mainly for, fire truck access, emergency vehicles, just so that there is a clear path if they get in to get out, rather than having to use driveways as a backup tool. So that's.
I understand why you did it. I just think it makes more sense to make it straight than just dead end it, because it's not really going to dead end. There's going to be one driveway going north, one driveway going south, I assume.
Right, but again, it's mainly for the fire access and then just the general ease of maneuvering at the end of the cul-de-sac there.
So are those driveways coming out of the cul-de-sac, or are they coming out west of the cul-de-sac?
This is sort of a close-up of the current plan. So this is 43rd coming in. So one axis would be approximately in the center of the roadway, and then as you come around the horn, so to speak, then there would be another access coming in south. So right now there's just two proposed on the south, and then when we get further plans for the north, then we would determine where those driveways would come off the cul-de-sac.
For the developer then, would you rather have it just dead end there and go into your driveways on the north and the south, as opposed to having a circle and encroaching on your property down there?
Yeah, I guess the circle is as a result of city engineering and their desired design. We don't see a reason from a developer's standpoint to have that, because of the circulation that we care about is adequate and satisfactory circulation for tenants and customers. So in the end,
want it or you don't want it? I didn't understand that.
That's a tough question, because I always think of weather and when we can get a permit and all those things. And my only fear is that changing the design, the time that goes into that, permitting, et cetera. But if we were designing it 2 months ago, or if maybe I'll talk.
All right, members of the commission, I think the question of the cul-de-sac goes back to who's going to end up owning that street. If it is a public street, we're going to require a cul-de-sac. As Brad mentioned, it helps with accessibility of fire trucks and probably more importantly, snowplows and stuff. You want to have a way to get those snowplows turned around without going up into private property and trying to turn around into a driveway and a parking lot. So as a public street, the cul-de-sac would be required. If it's not a public street, then the cul-de-sac is purely up to the decision of the developer. So it kind of depends on how we're going to classify this particular area.
Okay, thank you. You know, the developers made a lot of concessions through this, worked with everybody in the neighborhood, and we've been moving this along as good as we can through all this. And I'm just remembering this different. It was kind of an ask for this road. If they didn't get it all the way through, they didn't want it through in there at all, is the last developer told us. So we were kind of leaning, I mean, so I don't know if city council wasn't watching, but over there tonight, the developer kind of asked us to not have that road in there. It was going to clog up it, and we thought, well, as a concession for not begging to put it through and redesign his whole property 3 times, I feel sorry for you guys, because you have, that we said, okay, we're going to take the road out. Well, now the road's back in. At the end of the day, do you want the road or not? I mean, we can kick this can down the road a million days, but if you want the road in or not, because that's how I'm going to vote, because I'm looking out for the developer here in this one. Here's your $1 million question.
I guess your request was
Yeah, I'm not sure, I'm trying to think back to that, because we always wanted 43rd to go in and all the way through.
Yep.
And that's not going to happen.
Correct.
And we got the warrants for the lighted intersection, which allowed this project to move forward even without that. So from my perspective, I want it to be a city road. I want it to be denoted a city street for a number of reasons, including wayfinding for customers and tenants. Whether it has a circle at the end is up to the city. But in the end, I want the city road there and to be denoted 43rd Avenue so that we can properly address and brand our properties, so.
Understood. It's a good answer.
And
Okay.
I think as a follow-up, I think the cul-de-sac is just a critical part of traffic circulation in this area. For so many reasons, as was already mentioned, for the ease of maintenance and snow removal, but again, just for the idea that when a motorist comes in, if they make a wrong turn or whatever the case is, you take a wrong turn. Well, now you've got to circulate back through the parking lot, where one of the benefits of the cul-de-sac is you're always going to have the ability to come in and get out much easier than traversing a parking lot just to turn around and get out. And I guess I'm not hearing any strong objections in terms of keeping the cul-de-sac as part of a city street.
I just don't know why you couldn't just die into the property on 43rd. You pick up 20 feet and it just ends into their parking lot. How many wrong turns I've made in parking lots in my life, Brett?
But again, code.
I'm with you. So anybody else in the audience want to step up and address that item? Well, we still got the public hearing open, but go ahead, Cole. I'm just going to close. Go ahead.
That Star Avenue where it dumps into 40th to the north, that's staying private drive?
Yes.
All the way to Columbia?
Yes, the intersection that's been identified at Star will be a 3/4 intersection, so it's right in, right out, and I believe left in off of, so there's no through movements.
So what's the difference between that being a private and this one being a public with branding and addresses and everything?
I think just the robustness of the road. Again, it's at a signalized intersection. It's going to carry Probably a lot more traffic. As time goes by, it allows for the through street, so it's functioning, I think, at a much higher level than just a three-quarter access, which kind of goes back to one of my original points of being able to maintain control over that stretch of the side street. And again, the developer, as he mentioned, is requesting that it is be, to be a dedicated street.
Mr. Barkey, please.
So the last time that this was before the Planning and Zoning Commission, there was a lot of discussion revolved around maintenance, right? Not just who pays for the street to be installed, but how it's maintained over time. So I know I sent a series of questions, right, to you to try and get to the bottom of some of that.
Right.
So I was hoping we could maybe talk about that, right? So my understanding is that, and you said this, the street being installed would be special assessed to the property owner.
For the construction, the original construction of the street.
That would be a concrete street, sounds like. There was some discussion about asphalt, but that I understand now is really just limited to the pipeline or some sort of
Right, and those are the details that we need to find out, is what's the proper material to use strictly over the pipeline easement, and then the rest would anticipate it to be a standard concrete city street.
And so the expected service life of that street is 50 years, is that
Right, approximately 50 years.
Okay. So I guess the series of questions I was trying to get at is, in that 50-year time frame, that street will be plowed, it'll be swept, there will be a lot of maintenance that goes on day to day, and that will be paid for by the city, yes, out of general fund, street department.
Right, through, the property taxes you pay, ultimately portions of that and other sources go to, just like in front of your house, as far as responsibility of part of your property tax dollars going to street maintenance, snow plowing.
And so then 50 years from now, whenever the street is due to be replaced or otherwise have a major overhaul, then who pays for that cost?
Al can correct me if I'm wrong, but if, as the example goes, 50 years from now, it's ready for a reconstruction, then it's a 80-20 split, 80% being the city and 20% being the adjoining property owners, if that's not correct, yes.
Okay. That's, yes.
Okay, at this time, anybody else would like to step up to the microphone and address item 3.1, do so at this time. If not, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Any thoughts? Mr. White, please.
So I am sympathetic to the developer's request, especially the idea of 43rd continuing all the way through. I'm sort of new to this process, new to this board, so I saw this for the first time after some months, really. And my first impression was that 43rd ought to go all the way through, but that ship has sailed, and so at this point, I don't see why I don't see why the city would take on all of the cost of this road in perpetuity, understanding that the developer shares some of the installation, all of the installation costs. Thank you.
Mr. Riker.
I'm going to move approval as approved on August 7th by this committee.
So that would,
and then if the city council wants to put the road back in, they can do it.
I'll second it for discussion. Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Reichert and a second by Mr. Matichak. Discussion. I thought there would be something. I appreciate that.
Do you want to repeat the motion?
Mr. White?
Yeah, I agree. I would vote for that motion. I agree that that seems like a better arrangement for the city in the long term.
Okay, Mr. Chair, could we have the motion repeated, please?
Yes. Do you have that?
I can read it if you want.
Please.
That move approval with the condition of the removal of the public street and a lot line to run through the center of the removed public right-of-way. As I understand it, Brad, then if city council wants to approve it the other way, they can still approve it the other way, correct?
Correct.
Okay, because I don't want to slow down this project anymore, so, but I do want that noted, thank you.
Okay. You're still good with your second, Mr. Matichek? Okay. Any further discussion? If not, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. 3-2.
Vacation of part of the statutory 66-foot wide North Columbia Road, right-of-way lying in the 3100 block of North Columbia Road.
Ms. Edwardson.
Good evening. We are out on North Mill Road. The next 4 items are all going to correlate together. The vacation, the plat, the rezoning, and the annexation. Zoom in here a little bit. Maybe that's too far. So currently the state mill owns this triangular piece as well as this small triangular piece as well. You'll notice the right-of-way that's in between the two. Maybe a year or so, some of you may remember we split off a portion for the mill for a rail expansion. That expansion will go through these properties and then continue up north. But right where about the cursor is, right on that northern small triangle piece, they're looking to do a locomotive storage shed for their locomotives. To do that, they have to join the properties together because they'd be building across lot lines. So the first item is the vacation. They're requesting to vacate a portion of this right-of-way in order to do that, to build the locomotive shed. If I pull up the vacation map that was in your packets, how vacations work is that half of the right-of-way vacated goes to each adjoining side of the property. So we're looking at this area here to be vacated up until the property line. With vacations, it's standard practice to vacate perpendicular to the right-of-way. That's why we're not just vacating adjacent to the properties, so we are vacating to this lot line, which would take in, vacate a portion for this adjoining lot. That adjoining lot is Cullen Insulation, and the owner of that property is amenable to the vacation as well. Any questions on the vacation, or I can go through all of it together, vote on it separately. However, Steve, you want to proceed works for me.
So what she's asking is there's multiple things impacting here. We do have a public hearing on the one item, so when we break it apart, we're going to have to give that an opportunity.
Sure.
And come back to it. So yeah, please. Mr. Matichek.
I have something.
Sorry, didn't see you.
Thank you. I'd like to be excused from voting on anything where the state mill is involved in this procedure. Now, I know some of them are brought up by the state mill, some of them are brought up by the planning department, but if it pertains to state mill property, I'd like to be excused from voting on those. So I assume that's this one and 412.
3-2, 4-1, 4-2, and 4-3 would all be related to that project.
Even though they're not completely brought up by the state mill, some of them are brought up by you guys, but it pertains.
No, they're all being requested by the mill.
Then I would ask to be excused from all 4 of those.
So 3-2, 4-1, 4-2, and 4-3?
Yes.
Okay. I guess any issues with the recusal, I'm going to say congratulations, you're recused.
Thank you.
All right.
Do I have to vote on a recusal? I'm getting different nods here.
You can't force them to vote on something.
Well, you usually ask for a motion.
Right. I don't know why they do that here.
I don't either, but.
There's no reason.
It's been standard practice before, so if you would just go ahead and do the motion, we'll go through the.
Thank you. Second by Mr. Budke.
Thank you.
By Mr. Budke. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? No. Mr. Matichek, you are excused from those items. Thank you.
Thank you. Jumping into the plat then too, you'll notice the plat for the mill property will take in the northern piece as well as the vacated right-of-way. The they'll be able to do the locomotive storage piece of it. It's a really rough plat, I will throw that out there. There might be some minor tweaks onto it, but due to timing and things like that, we wanted to just get it on the agenda.
Okay.
Then jumping through to the rezoning, same thing, that northern triangle piece is the cause for most of this. Current northern piece is B3, bringing that in under one parcel. We can't have split zoning on that, so we need to rezone it to the I2 State Mill property. And then same for the annexation, that northern triangle piece wasn't previously annexed, so that needs to be brought in as part of it as well. So with that, I can answer any questions. The engineer on the project is also here if you have any questions, but I'd be happy to answer anything.
Mr. Johnson?
Yep.
On the vacation.
Yep.
Oh, I think it was the first one.
Okay.
You still show that utility easement on lot 1 of Lockwood?
Yep.
East side, is that staying?
Yes.
Even though it's.
No portion of Lockwood is being adjusted with these modifications. They'll absorb, that portion of the property will absorb their share of the, actually, no, I take that back. All of that is being added into the plat property. So Lockwood, lot F, Lockwood isn't changing. Ooh, I'm stumbling over words, so tell me if I'm confusing you. You'll see this little leg here.
Okay.
That's
So
the vacated part.
Lots.
Not these two. Just because they're in separate subdivisions, it caused a little bit of different work and paperwork. So that's why the actual rail will go over the lot line,
Yeah,
but the locomotive storage will be on its own separate lot.
The rail's in.
Yes, the rail is in. It's there.
So, okay, I think it's pretty clear once you look at it, I guess. Anybody else got any other questions for Ms. Edmondson on this? So, not seeing any. Mr. Rudke, please.
Just about utility easements, right? So like on the image you've got on the screen here now, there's utility easement marked, I guess, parallel to Mill Road. There's not anything like that marked for this new proposed block, lot 1?
Like I said, it's a rough plat due to timing. The final plat will actually, I'm assuming, Al can correct me, will continue that easement line. There's a small portion you'll notice too where the right-of-way jogs up. We intend to take that little tiny piece as right-of-way. But again, just due to the nature of the project and winter coming, we got this very rough coming forward for preliminary as soon as possible. By final, we'll have those edits and all of that, those utility easements and that right-of-way shown.
And then one other question in the packet, it made reference to the coulee that's kind of south of this just a little ways.
Yes, thank you.
So I guess I'm just sort of curious about,
how that came about?
Right, because if we vacate this and all these are approved, that's like the right-of-way for all of Columbia Road. So it seems like you're not.
Sure, I jumped over that, so thank you for bringing that up. We had originally looked at vacating all of North Columbia Road from 27th Avenue all the way up. However, you'll notice our floodplain runs through most of that already with the coulee underneath it. It's blocked out by the image there, which is why we settled, after discussions with engineering and various things, we'd like to maintain control over that area for the coulee and the floodplain area. So we limited it just to the northern piece that's shown in red here. We did talk to the owners just south of Cullen Insulation, who happened to be Bergstrom. You'll notice they had previously used this kind of offshoot gentleman's agreement to cut through the Lockwood property. That's since been kind of ceased with the installation of the rail. They were the only ones that we felt may potentially, along with Cullen, have access through this North Columbia. Otherwise, the coulee blocks everything to the south. They agreed to the vacation with no issues. Cullen agreed to it without any issues. So from that perspective, we limited it to that area.
So the right-of-way originally is noted here, North Columbia Road. The probability of that ever being a road is?
Just due to the flood protection and the floodplain, all of those different things, yes, the probability of it is no. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Radchik.
I'm confused. I just want to point out one thing. That particular road, if it was ever put in, would go to two existing landfills that the city had used many years ago. And I think everybody knows that's pretty much dead property. Nothing happens.
Okay. With that, I need to back up to item 3.2, and we will open the public hearing. Anybody would like to step up to the microphone and address item 3.2, please do so at this time. Seeing no hands or nobody coming up, bring it back to commission, Mr. Reichert. Move approval on 3.2. Second. Second, Mr. Johnson. Discussion? Not. Vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Yes.
Not really hearing
She did
Megan's
do that
vote. Is anybody else?
Not all of them. She'll need to read in 4-1.
Mr. Reichert.
Can I have the 4-1 read into the record? I'm going to have them all read in and then we'll make our motions.
No.
If you can read in 4-1, Sherilyn, thank you.
4-1, replat of Lot 2, Block 1, Enger subdivision, and ordinance dedicating right-of-way.
Mr. Reichert. Second. Second by Mr. Johnson. Discussions? None? Vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Motion passes 4-2. Please read that in.
Ordinance to amend zoning map, rezone Lot 2, Block 1, Enger subdivision from B3 General Business District to I2 Heavy Industrial District.
Mr. Reichert. Move approval. Second. Second by Mr. Johnson. He beat you to it, Mr. Kuhn. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, 4-2 passes. 4-3.
Ordinance to annex all of Lot 2, Block 1, Enger subdivision not previously annexed.
Mr. Reichert? Move approval. Moved by Mr. Reichert. Second by Mr. Johnson. Discussion? None. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. 4-3 passes.
Thank you.
Okay. Item 4.4.
Ordinance to amend section 18-0216 relating to dog daycare and boarding facilities.
Mr. Gingler.
Okay, as you recall, we've had a number of discussions at the Planning and Zoning Commission over the course of several months about the need and desire to allow for a larger outdoor area for dog daycares. This is a preliminary ordinance. The bullet points that we're going to talk through are going to be the main points of the ordinance, and following preliminary approval, we will have the city attorney drafted into an actual ordinance form. So some of the highlights, I did incorporate in the staff report the full current ordinance. However, if we could just focus on the highlights that we've discussed, and under the section in your staff report labeled proposed ordinance changes, so that would be on the bottom of page 3, we'll just kind of go through them in order. Other than the actual size, so if you recall, right now the current ordinance says you can have a total maximum 300 square feet of an outdoor area, has to be hard surfaced with concrete or other impervious surface. And again, as we've discussed over the years, that has just shown to be not effective for a number of reasons. Originally, it was a recommendation back when we first adopted the ordinance specifically to have it impervious so that it could be washed off and cleaned that way. Well, that only then pushes the problem outward and it doesn't necessarily get cleaned up. So what staff has proposed, and we looked elsewhere, that we would allow a floor surface for the fenced area to consist of materials such as pea gravel, synthetic turf, natural grass, or a combination of those materials. And when that would be proposed, then that would be under review by the planning, engineering, and health departments to determine, proximity to any particular drainage concerns, or just to be able to analyze the depth of the materials that they're using. And again, as I note, that these materials are very common, as we did research elsewhere in terms of what people are using out there. The next change, and I know Mr. Reichert had mentioned at the last time we discussed, if we are going to allow a larger area, Mr. Reichert had indicated should there be a maximum or at least a benchmark to shoot for. So how we have it worded, and it's still subject to change, is the maximum size of the outdoor fenced area may be equal to the size of the indoor area. That's been talked about with one of the owners and operators out there. The question was, well, if we can have X amount of square feet for indoor play area, could we have that same amount on the outside? So on the one hand, we could use that as a benchmark, but what we're trying to craft the language is that it's not guaranteed because of the different situations of where these properties are now and where the future come into play. So as we did talk about, that although it could be equal to the indoor area, that ultimately the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, after review, would have the final determination as to the maximum amount of the outdoor area. And that decision then needs to be based on certain criteria, a minimum of certain criteria, which we have listed. Proximity to residential and commercial buildings, whether or not the principal building provides a barrier between the fenced area and nearby buildings. That's case in point where we have Petopia right now, where the outdoor area is adjacent or near some heavier commercial uses, but the idea that the whole structure in and of itself is a barrier between the outdoor area and then the residential uses on the other side of South Third. So that's just a factor to keep in mind as we would review these. And then just in general, whether or not the location and size of the outdoor area will cause negative impacts on the surrounding properties. And I think that's just a general catch-all in terms of proximity to these other businesses, other uses, and just in general, making some of those determinations of potential impacts on surrounding areas. So that's kind of a recap of what we've talked about so far. I would open it up to questions. I do know that the owners, and this is preliminary, so it's not a public hearing, but the Petopia owners are here as well to talk about their desire to allow for increased boarding capacity. Right now, the ordinance reads that 50% of the allowable dogs for daycare can be boarded. So in their existing operation, they're allowed approximately 60 dogs based on their indoor area, of which 30 can be boarded. They've expressed interest in the need to maybe try to expand that, so their request is to, well, I can let them speak more specifically to that if the commission is ready, or you have questions at this point for me.
Anybody have a question for Mr. Engler?
Yeah. Are we voting on the overnight this meeting as well?
The request, yeah, for the additional boarding would be a part of the ordinance if it's acted on that way.
Two things I never thought I'd know a lot about. This is one. I'm glad I got on this commission to learn all this. Mr. Hiker.
So do you want tweaks to this right now in a motion, or do you want us to just give you our thoughts? I'm going to move to approve it, but there's a couple things that I think should be changed.
I think that would be probably the way to go, so then when it moves on to council, it's in the form that the commission ultimately approves.
Okay, just to get the ball rolling here, I'm going to move approval with a change, and that is wherever it references the principal building providing a barrier between the fenced area and nearby buildings, that it just, whether or not there is a barrier, whether it be the principal building or something else. So just whether or not there is a barrier.
But would you consider a fence a barrier?
Who knows? I mean, we'll have to see that when we, I mean, if we're gonna look at it here, I think principal building, we're thinking that way because of the way that this building is set up. But I think there could be lots of different barriers. Maybe berm, maybe trees, maybe space, I don't know, whatever. But I don't see a reason to have principal building in there. And then the other one, I think we should be careful about the negative impacts, that we should maybe put some modifier on that. And I'm open to discussion on that and would be willing to amend this motion. But I will say whether or not it will cause more than minimal negative impacts. So I'm afraid somebody might come in and say, oh, any negative impact at all means we have to get rid of it. And I don't want to use a term like significant. But
So could you repeat that?
yeah. So move approval, taking out principal building, so that we just read whether or not there is a barrier between the fenced areas. And then in two places, I believe you have the negative impacts, and I would say more than minimal negative impacts.
I'll second that. Okay.
Oh.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, I'll second it.
If I may,
I'm just going to give a minute for catch up here on the motion, if you don't mind.
right, but still part of the discussion for this preliminary ordinance is also the question of whether or not we'll change the capacity for the boarding. And that's what,
I can't believe that wouldn't come up to us in two different parts. There's two different things here, right? It doesn't matter. Okay.
yeah, I mean, it's all part of the ordinance that we're amending.
So in your research, Brad, I mean, what are your thoughts on 100% of the number?
This is a pretty unique situation. With these businesses we've had, like when we do our research, or sometimes we can find specifically, codes that are applicable. For example, when we did the research on how big should an outdoor area be, there really wasn't anything concrete. We came across some, for example, that didn't allow outdoor areas. Somehow they managed to have indoor areas. So it's pretty inconsistent, so I can't say that I found anything industry standards in terms of what's the magic number. Is it 50%? Is it 30? The only implications I would assume that if another part of the applicant's request too is that they'll ultimately be coming back to request an expansion of their conditional use permit. So we know that because the outdoor area, if that's approved, that requires a reapproval of the conditional use permit. And they've also expressed interest to me that in doing so, they would also like to expand the amount of indoor area as well. And I think that's the part I guess I would like probably for the owners to talk to you about, and then maybe give some of their opinions on the number of boarding that they would like to have.
Now, this ordinance is going to go beyond Petopia, right?
Correct.
I mean, they just have been the, how do you want to say it, the voice, the backbone of the industry in Grand Forks, it seems like, because they're here in front of us donating their time to enlighten us. So I just want to, I'd love to hear from another owner, but if they're not going to come forward like these people have, I guess here we are. And I applaud them for doing so. This is, it's all new stuff we're dealing with here, to be honest with you. It's a trial, this is all under a conditional use permit, correct?
Yes, this is.
So that's something that can be revoked and pulled and adjusted as different bodies see fit, correct? Just making sure we're all on the same page, and we all know that. That's your, Mr. Bucky, please.
So just a couple of questions. So going back to this idea of the outdoor fenced area and the size, right? So this is proposing a maximum. Based on the discussion last time, it seemed like there was less need to define a maximum, but actually maybe more of a need to define a minimum. Sounds like the 300 square feet that is in the code currently is probably as small as it ought to be. Is there any value in adding that to the ordinance?
Force them to have an outdoor area? So if somebody comes to us and says, I don't want to have any outdoor area, you're going to say it can't be approved?
Well, I think the fact that there's an outdoor area is in the ordinance currently, is that?
Right.
And it's permitted or required?
Yeah, the actual language of the ordinance, I can't find that it's saying that it is required. I think it's assumed that if you have this, you would need an outdoor area.
But you said in your research you've seen areas that don't have an outdoor area.
Yeah, there was some very restrictive ordinances for whatever reasons, and of course I didn't do any more research into why, if they had some sort of high-tech indoor area. I don't know the circumstances for those, so.
I don't see a reason to require an outdoor area. I think if they don't want to have one, they don't have one.
So here it is, this is 11F2 from the packet. It says all services shall be conducted from within a fully enclosed building with the exception of an outdoor fenced area. So,
right. So that's saying you can have an outdoors fenced area, not requiring one as I read it.
Okay.
I guess I don't understand why the maximum, I'm with you, I'm reading that over, I don't understand why there even would be a maximum if you had the space. As long as they made the criteria of fencing or barriers or whatever we're gonna say, do you care if they're in the right side of the property where they can have football field? I mean, if the property allows it, I hate to reel it in. I'm with you, Mr. Breitke. I'm kind of picking up what you're putting down.
So then one other question. So now switching to the overnight boarding. So I just trying to understand what is the rationale of having the 50% rule, and what's the rationale versus of having a 100% rule?
If I can recall back, I think it was in 2004, when these numbers were being brought forward, I think some of the comments or rationale were still trying to make a distinction between a dog daycare operation and a full kennel operation. So our commercial kennel operations, which are allowed or only allowed outside of town, those are 5 acres, a minimum of 5 acres. And they have some different requirements that allow obviously much more dogs. So I think some of the earlier rationale was, you know, if 50% of what is allowed, you know, to be boarded, is that still keeping this type of business within the realm of a, you know, a built-out urban setting versus a rural? So I think it was just maybe the sheer numbers at that time.
Mr. Kuhn?
I guess the proposal to drop the principal building, I can understand that, but I'm a little uncomfortable with just the idea of a barrier. Something should be probably put in as a substantial barrier or whatever between adjacent. A barrier, that's a chain link fence. That is a barrier. I think it should be set up that it is some way that there be a substantial barrier. You know, drop the, and I have no problem with dropping the principal building being required for that barrier, but I think we should have something in to make sure that it is more of a substantial barrier.
I don't have a problem with that, but I think all of this is going to come before us every time. So, I mean, we can look at that. If you want to add substantial, I don't have a problem with that, but I think barrier means a barrier, but it doesn't matter to me.
So back to that, what you just said, the question or the statement you said, maybe to protect all the work that Pantopia has done on this, if I wanted to open a dog daycare and bring it to this, would I have to bring it to this commission to get all these things settled? Or could I just open one up under the current ordinances and all this stuff and get it done?
If a new one?
Yep.
No.
I want to start Waswick Doggy Daycare tomorrow.
Then you start back at the conditional use permit application process.
Okay. That's what I wanted to hear out loud. I knew the answer, I just wanted to hear it. Well, it's your motion that we're sitting on. So, any further discussion? I don't see any. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. And that is with the significance of the barrier.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. I knew it. You pulled one there.
So can we clarify what the motion was then, please?
As it was read.
Yep. Okay. Did you get that? Okay. Yes, Mr. Yes, Mr. Matichek seconded it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion was, we'll do the best we can here.
Or do we need it? Back again,
Please do so. You got my paper.
But if I could remind the commission, please, in terms of addressing the question of the boarding, that hasn't been addressed yet, in terms of, are we going to change the ordinance?
It was all.
As I understood it, it was to approve what you have, which included the overnight boarding increase to 100%.
Preliminary approval.
Well, that wasn't staff's recommendation.
Well, it wasn't your recommendation.
Well, if you read the overnight boarding, city owners have requested the change. This will be discussed further at the commission meeting.
Okay. So what is staff's recommendation?
I would like to hear from the owners in terms of how this additional boarding works and what,
Well, last time they were here, they told us that they wanted it and they didn't see a reason not to because they had the staff, and they said it was actually, the dogs are all sleeping, so it's actually easier and quieter and there's less reason. As I remember them, unless their testimony would change today, I mean, that's the way I remember it. I don't know what the rest of the committee thought.
Correct. So it
was my intention to approve the 100% if the commission was incorrect when they voted on it, if they didn't believe that.
All right.
Okay.
That was my understanding.
Okay.
My understanding on the second.
Okay. All right. So do you need me to read it to you?
Please.
To approve as submitted with the change of taking out principal building, so it just says a barrier. And then anywhere that it says negative impacts, add the words more than minimal in front of negative.
With the rest of it intact.
Yes.
Okay.
Does that work, Brad?
Yes.
All right.
All right. All right. 4-5.
Shared parking agreement for 920 North 3rd Street, 930 North 3rd Street, and 111 Gateway Drive.
Mr. Gangler.
Okay. Okay, as indicated in your staff report, we have a request for shared parking, and we are talking about the same building. We refer to it as 3rd and 9 as the applicant. So the first map we're looking at is just sort of the general lay of the land with Big Jim Tires to the north. Prairie Harvest is immediately to the west. And you should have received earlier today an email. I sent you a letter from the applicant. He will also be speaking with you this evening. I'll go through some of the initial slides. It's a pretty unique unique situation. We haven't had anything like this, I guess, in my recollection. As I stated in the staff report, the Planning and Zoning Commission by code does have the authority to approve these shared parking agreements. It says nothing of it going to the city council, and there was no reference to any notifications or, you know, any kind of neighborhood meeting. So this is being brought to you for the first time for your review. In working with the applicant, he supplied this map. So like in your staff report, there is a shared parking agreement that has been executed both with Prairie Harvest as well as Big Jim Tires. And you notice on this depiction, the number 49 is shown. That includes the stalls that Big Jim's has entered into the agreement with the applicant, as well as constructing 24 new stalls on the south side of the building, with an additional 7 stalls being built on the back side of 3rd and 9. This particular parking lot is still under review. In order to be able to construct it in that area between the two buildings, they're going to require a variance to some parking lot paving setbacks, which will go to the Board of Adjustments in a few weeks. As an example, typically when a parking lot is adjacent or abutting a building, there's a 5-foot setback. According to their numbers, they'll need a 3-foot setback in order to maintain the proper width of a drive aisle to drive through the area. This map is just for the overall lay of the land of the neighborhood. So to back up, what the applicant is proposing is to do a banquet space on the opposite side of where Petopia is situated. So it would be in the kind of the southerly or bottom half, so to speak, of the banquet hall. So in first talking with a developer, we determined, or their plans show that they have a maximum occupancy level of 174 people based on how they're going to operate it. And as I indicated in the staff report, they're looking at wedding receptions and other types of social gatherings to be able to utilize the space. They would work through a caterer who would bring food in, so it's not a restaurant itself. They would have, again, the caterer come in. So we looked at all the different parking ratios in code, and which is what we have to do sometimes when we can't find, for example, in our code right now, banquet hall itself isn't listed as a separate land use. So a lot of times we have to try to figure out what is the most equivalent. So what we did find in the parking code was a parking ratio for private clubs or lodges. So we thought that was the most rational connection of a private club or a lodge versus a banquet hall where you have different functions. That particular parking ratio calls out a straight 1 space for 3 people, for 3 occupants. So we do the math, that turns out to be 58 parking stalls that would result if we use that parking space.
Brad, what is a restaurant? Do you know off the top of your head?
Different types of ratios. A fast food restaurant, we have 50 square feet for gross floor area, and some other ratios. For a restaurant, it's 1 off-street parking space for each 75 feet of gross floor area. Yeah, so and each parking ratio has things built into it that may not be explicitly called out. So some of the questions we're looking at then is obviously Petopia shares the same parking lot. So right now the main parking lot for the building itself has a total of 28 off-street parking stalls. And I guess I would look to Petopia. We talked about existing, and if the business were to expand, roughly 8 stalls is kind of an anticipation of what would be needed. So, after doing the math, then we had to figure out how many stalls would ultimately be needed for the business, for Petopia, and then how to account for the shared parking agreement. So with that, I think I'll stop and have the Mr. Wesley, the applicant, come up and maybe give you a little more of a background, the details on exactly what it is that they are wanting to do.
Brad, can you just pull up the slide that has all the numbers on it again? Yeah, that one. Can you just leave that up while he's talking?
Actually, we can, but he also has...
Oh, he has his own. So how many were there on that? Total?
There's a total of 106 for the entire site.
So we have 26, 7, and then what is it, 24 above the 7?
The 49 includes the 24 that would be constructed on...
7 and 24 and 26 would be adjacent to the building?
Let me try to zoom in a little bit.
Yeah, so if you take the 24, the 7, and the 28 that are that's adjacent directly.
Not direct, well, the 28 and 7, the blue lines represent property lines, so the 28 and 7 would be on...
No, I understand. I'm just
Oh.
saying, for my own thinking. And would there be an entrance in the back, do you know?
I believe there is, but that's probably better answered by...
Thank you.
Did you want to go to the slide that you had?
Sure. Yeah, I can. Let me flip back and forth.
Sure.
Good evening, commissioners. So it's been a while since I've been here to talk about this building, and this has been an exciting project and personal investment of myself, and hopefully I won't go too long here and take too much of your time.
Name for the record, Tom?
Oh, yeah. Tom Wesley, with 3rd and 9, the property owner of the building in discussion. Petopia is a tenant of ours, and right now, 3rd and 9, or Petopia has, we've kind of gotten them into the building, and they've been their business. They're at a year mark here, and they've been very successful. Their business is flourishing. Obviously, they're here today to talk about expansion, and that's a good thing. And so, when we bought the building, we bought it as a kind of looking at it as what could this building become. Right, it was a cold storage building, and drive by it every day, and it was deemed for blight. In all honesty, I mean, what else do you do with the building that sits there that was cold storage and did tractor trailer delivery, and the adjacent neighbors have been very accommodating and very willing to work with us and very supportive of the development of the building. They're very happy with the outcome of the exterior. They're very happy with the new tenant of Petopia, and in my conversations of what we're trying to do with this new tenant, they've been very supportive of it as well. Obviously with executed site access and shared parking agreements. So today we're at, we've got another tenant that is starting a new business in Grand Forks. She is a prominent business owner in Grand Forks currently, and she's been a resident here for many years with her family, who owns other businesses in the community as well. And right now there's a demand for reception and gathering spaces that are kind of have that modern, restored industrial and farm type style of architecture. And being a nerdy architect that I am, that's exactly what drew me to this building. Is when you go inside the building and you see the bones and the character of what this building stood for 60 years ago, and how can we take and not really rebuild it, or the vision is restoring it and bringing that character back out. And so right now this type of venue doesn't exist in Grand Forks. And so this tenant is exactly what the vision was with this building. And so we feel that the restoration of what is there is going to be a success for this property. The demand for this type of gathering space, people are either fleeing Grand Forks or bypassing Grand Forks to go to other cities, such as Fargo, Bemidji, Minneapolis, to get this type of ambiance and character in a wedding reception, corporate event. And so we want to keep that business here, and that's what this tenant is after as well. She wants to keep the business here rather than them fleeing out. She supports the business on another side by providing a lot of the embellishments of the events, and so this is a new expansion for her. The building is currently zoned B3, which allows this type of use, and so when we bought the property, we're kind of somewhat handcuffed to, we can't really add any more land. We're kind of landlocked into it, and so we're doing the best that we can with what we've got to work with. In the discussion, I think with the tenant, 95% of these events are going to be wedding receptions, and so when we looked at that initially, we said, and kind of what Brad had pointed out is going through the land development code and understanding the parking requirements, what does closely align to that? And well, if you were going to a wedding reception, where were you prior to that? You were likely at a church. A church is under the institutional guidelines of the land development code, which is a 1-to-6 ratio. And so Brad and I have talked about that, and I think we've gone back and forth, and we've kind of come to this point of, there is some flexibility and some compromise, and we're at a 1-to-3 ratio. And so working with the adjacent neighbors, and like I said, they've been very accommodating. I think we can be very accommodating to get to that 1-to-3 ratio with a shared access agreement and a shared parking agreement, and those are already executed. And the other side of this as well is that the operation of this event space is really evenings and weekends. You don't see very many weddings at 8 to 5 in the morning, or 8 to 5 during the day, and that's when these other adjacent businesses are in operation in full swing. And and they're also not operating during the weekends either. And so the alignment or the misalignment of that really further strengthens the case of the shared parking agreement. And so, like I said, this development, and there's some case studies I can show, but the pictures that are up right now are just on the lower right. You can kind of see what the space is right now, and the larger picture is what we're intending to do with the space. This is a rendering, and so it's all exposed open trusses, a true 2x4 wood floor, because it used to be a warehouse, and so we want to bring that back to life, paint it all and expose a lot of that character in there. Like Brad had said, this is all going to be these are all catered events. There is no kitchen or bar or restaurant that this is going to be. Everything's going to be just catered in. It's going to be served off of a bar license that whoever is catering it is they're going to carry the liquor and beer license. So just some case studies that we've looked at. Some events that are near and afar. One is down in Fargo, the Pines, which is a very similar character and nature. There's one in Medicine Lake, Minnesota, and these are all venues that she has actually been doing her other business to these venues, and so she's kind of striking off and starting a new business to provide this type of venue and do her flourishments as well. So this is Minnesota, and then even as far as Kansas City. But it's about taking some building in a warehouse feel and character and kind of bringing that space back to life, and that's what a lot of people are desiring right now. We've kind of, time is somewhat of the essence. Ideally we wanted to have our Christmas party in there, but getting through this whole process, we've kind of done this elsewhere. But that's another example of a type of event that we'd have Bergstrom's Christmas party or whomever, you know, our Christmas party, or it'd be rentable and served off catering. So yeah, that's where we're at.
So, I think we probably have a couple questions for Mr. Wesley. I'm just guessing because I see hands going up in the field.
My first one's for Brad.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misspoke, but I know. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Riker.
Brad, so we're just approving this. They still have to, I mean, obviously these sites aren't built yet. I assume they would have to be built before you could give the certificate of occupancy, or how would that work exactly?
Yeah, in terms of, like I said, with the parking lot, that also has to go, you know, through the approval, so there would have to be some contingencies upon, you know, approval of all other requirements before it would be approved. But, and I did talk to Mr. Wesley about one aspect that I don't necessarily have answers for right now, but within the two shared parking agreements.
The times?
The times, there's a little bit of an overlap, and these can be talked about, you know, whether it's, I think both agreements indicate 6 p.m.
To 7 a.m.
To 7 a.m. But then also, another aspect of the agreements, and again, I don't have the exact answer to, but each agreement does indicate that the agreement may be terminated by either party within 30-day written notice.
Right. So those were going to be my next two questions, actually.
So again, I don't have those answers. This is obviously new for all of us, but I guess that leads to the question of what if a property were to be sold, or that agreement, the owner just simply says, I want to terminate this agreement. To me, I guess that just leaves a question mark of then what do we do? And I think that's...
What do we do with other shared parking agreements? Do we make them binding and run with the land, or?
Well, that's the thing. We, in terms of any shared parking agreements, the only one I recall seeing in the records was maybe many years ago at UND for one of the...
Isn't there one between the Crooked Pint and the old, wasn't there one between Crooked Pint and the bar that was next to it?
Well, there's a difference between when strip centers and those types of contiguous properties are built. Usually when it comes as a single owner, or...
But those were two owners, as I recall.
Yeah, you had the green mill.
But the developer, when they determine which lot they get and how much parking. So this is different because none of these properties have ever been interrelated. I think many years ago, there was some agreement between El Rocco and an adjoining property owner where they let them use just a completely separate parking lot. Again, that was many years ago.
I mean, I think for me, for my comfort, it would have to be a non-revocable agreement. It would have to be filed and run with the property. It could not have a time limitation, because what if, you know, they decide the next day that they're going to have lunch meetings, you know, you know, how would we stop them from having lunch meetings all of a sudden? Which is, I mean, I assume that, yeah, most of their business is going to be at night. That makes sense. And then the other thing is, would we require some sort of signage to say, hey, additional parking available at, you know, big gyms, or additional parking available at, you know.
Otherwise, you're going to get a free-for-all in the apartment building next to it.
Right, and then you're going to have pissed off tenants in the apartment.
Right.
Late night, corporate, Thursday night, corporate party, people are responsible to leave their cars, show up to work on Friday, parking lot's full. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
Well, I think you can tow them then. I mean, you need some signage. But I mean, I don't think they're insurmountable. I think we can figure it out, because I think it's I love the plan. I think it's great. I just want to make sure that this little neighborhood isn't inundated with cars.
Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. So those did come up as well. I've reached out as far as the old CarQuest building and talked to that owner as well, and they're 100% on board. And the discussion of, signing, kind of park at your own risk or, within these hours, they're completely fine with that. All the adjacent property owners. Big Jim's has actually expressed some interest in using getting advantage of putting that parking on the backside for his staff parking during his hours of operation, 8 to 5 or whatever. Just it clears up his lot a little bit too. And but yeah, it just comes down to, you park there and you're still there in the morning, the owner has the right to tow them, right? And so the tenant is very comfortable with the amount of parking that actually exists there right now. She's used to working in downtown Minneapolis, where parking is a little different than
Transportation and
yeah.
parking ramps.
And her point is, at a wedding reception, there's Uber and Lyft, and wedding parties are arriving on buses, and even Christmas parties. People, we want people not on the roads. We want them using some type of shared parking. And so
have you explored the having 24-hour shared parking with these people as opposed to 6 p.m. to 7 a.m.?
Well, Prairie Harvest, I actually didn't even ask for their parking. They offered it up. I just wanted to access their property, and they said, well, you're fine to park here too. We have no problems with that. And then sometimes, if they have a event themselves or a board meeting or something, they get a little tight, and so they could throw a car over an ours. I said, yeah, that's totally fine. I don't care. We're neighbors. So
I got Miss Sandy chiming in too, so I just want to make sure she's read text that we just can't hear, but she is listening. She also agrees. She didn't say this, that she agrees with Alex, because that would just put me over the edge. That it would be nice to have this, for lunch meetings and different events during the day also.
Mm-hmm.
I could see companies using this all the time. She doesn't want to put a limitation just for evenings only.
Okay.
I agree with that too. I mean, we have a sizable company I know of that holds 3-4 times a year meetings that involve about 130 people.
Yeah.
That we look for spaces like this all the time.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go on myself here, get off of Megan's wagon. Wow, that rhymed. And I'm gonna say with Alex that I really like the plan, Tom. I really like what's going on in the thought process. How do we get there? Because I don't want to see. My fear is that, let's say Big Jim decides to sell out next month.
Mm-hmm.
And here you've just built this beautiful thing, and it's all ready, and now you've lost a huge percentage of your parking, which makes it now doesn't work. That my fear is for you, you know what I'm saying? Not for,
Sure.
It's more how we can do this, and I do think that the little neighborhood we keep talking about that has been really forgiving on dog parks and businesses and things really changing the way they do life. I think we should almost throw something, we talked about this, Brad, maybe a little blanket mailer out or a neighborhood meeting or something, just to clue these people on what they got coming too. They've encompassed a lot, and they're still homeowners, and they still have a say, and I want to hear from the business owner next to them of the apartment building, make sure they're good with it. Just my thoughts. But I do like the idea, and it's a great spot for it. But you do have to remember, you're already sharing it with Petopia, who's asking to go 24 hours a day. So they are going to be a 24-hour business, correct?
Well, just overnight boarding.
Overnight board, yeah.
But they're going to have employees. They're going to be open, right? They're going to have cars in and out of there with their employees. And they were adding to their outdoor area, and I see that as parking lot now. Yeah. So I had to question that.
Yeah, we've reserved some area back there. That's why there's only 7 adjacent to the 3rd and 9 building,
So you
because
already factored that in.
we're
now?
trying to preserve some area for them for outdoor area. Yeah.
So I was going to say, we just kind of agreed with some of that, and then we're going to take it away right away. That's kind of how this night's going for us. Did anybody else comments, questions? Mr. Bucky, please.
Yeah, so I actually had a question about the apartment building, which I realize is a different zoning. Was that, were they approached about a shared parking agreement?
I did not, I did not approach them because their hours of operation really align with the reception area. Because people are coming home in the evenings, that's when the reception would be coming online, so they're full and we're full, so there won't be really any opportunity. I mean, maybe during the day could
I think apartments
suggest
have enough
something, but-
struggle getting their parking per, room, you know, to.
Right, with that, you know, the way the ordinance is written, you know, it calls out the B1, B2, B3, and B4 as the ability to have shared parking, but then it also calls out on the residential side, so it doesn't cross the two. So in this case, the apartment building was approved at, I don't remember the exact number, but required 150 parking stalls, let's say. They have 150
Yeah.
parking stalls.
If I remember right, we didn't go very far over that, and they usually don't.
So, you know, again, some of these questions, I guess, that don't have answers right now, is, you know, specifically with the termination clause, and then the effect of what position does that put the city in, and what position does that put the business owner in, if potentially a significant amount of parking is taken away.
Yeah, go ahead, Cole.
Continue.
Mr. Johnson.
I know we talked about it last time, but there's no longer a bike path back there? Or is that bike path still there?
There is a remnant of the bike path easement, but we already vacated the one to the, on the apartment building. And the bike route map has already been changed to reflect the rerouted. So that easement is basically no longer functional, and it just would be vacated as well.
Is it still paved or asphalted back there right now?
I think there's still a
it's
concrete surface, but yeah, that, again, it's no longer part of the technical bikeway route, so that would just be would get vacated.
I'm trying to think of the best way to do this. Mr. Riker, you usually do. I appreciate it.
I'm going to move approval of this, as stated. And then I'll comment when I'm done.
Wow.
I'll comment if it's
Yeah,
seconded.
because I was going to get my tape recorder out on my phone or try to voice record you on my phone.
Somebody want to second it?
I'll second. Mr. Budke, thank you. Discussion. Mr. Riker.
I'm going to vote to approve this for you. I don't think it's going to do you any good at all. I don't think that the city would approve. I would hope that the city wouldn't approve it, because I think you've got to have something more concrete. I'm approving it to keep it moving, because I'm assuming we can come back, yes.
As I indicated earlier, though, it's just this body that is the approving.
This is just preliminary, right?
No, this is, the way the code's written, it just says that this body shall approve.
Right, but what I'm saying is, we can, so I guess it doesn't matter if we approve it or, we only see it once.
Correct.
We need to vote it down then. Okay. All right, so here's the problem that I have. I think we should keep this moving, but I think it's gotta be 24 hours, and it's gotta be binding on future owners. So it's gotta be, because otherwise.
I think at that point, probably the motion would be maybe to table.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's gonna be the direction, then.
And I don't think that it's gonna cause a problem. I mean, I don't know if you've talked to the other people about it, but I mean, I think it's workable, but there's just too many contingencies that if we approve that, if I was deciding whether or not to allow you to put that business in there and how to do it, I would say, well, this agreement doesn't really help you that much. I mean, it gets us part of the way there, but you've got the two problems. It could be revoked at any time, and what do we do if all of a sudden it becomes the hotspot for lunch meetings?
Can we, can I
Yeah.
Can I modify the?
Right, yeah, that's what I want you to be able to do, but
Set access agreements and then, contingent on that modified and then, or is it
Well, that's
still
what I
gotta
was
come
trying
back?
to do, but Brad said that probably doesn't even really matter. That it's just a one approval deal anyway. I was just giving it, because I thought it was preliminary.
Oh, no. So you wouldn't be acting on it now
Yeah.
if the direction is to go make whatever appropriate changes and then to bring it back forward again.
Well, and maybe we should talk to, I don't know if you talk to it, does inspections or is it your office that decides?
Well, the risk, when I'm going off of Megan just texted me too, I'm going off of it, the risk is the business. So if they do, we're not in the business sector here, if they do sell Big Jim's Tire and take out all your parking, it's on you, Tom. That's what we're.
Yeah, I guess.
We can't protect that at the end of the day.
And so if let's say we did it in perpetuity and they get to a point in 5 years and they want to sell the property and they can't because of that agreement, and then I release that agreement, then
Yeah, there's
I've
gotta be
got to, then I've got to
somebody
come,
let it go.
then I got to come back to you, to the city and say, we've released this agreement. Has there been any problems? Is this working? Is it not working? What's the next step forward? I think, versus addressing it in 30 days, if we both had an agreement in 30 days, I would have to still come to you guys and say, yeah, they want to terminate this agreement, City of Grand Forks, they want to terminate it. What can we do moving forward? How do we handle the
Because
business?
the problem is, Brad, if they lose those parking spots, you can't shut down you have no authority to shut down this banquet hall once it's been approved, right?
Well, that poses a very problematic, and I talked briefly with Mr. Swanson, but we didn't get into a lot of those details about the agreements. So I think to answer that question though, because ultimately if that is the case, the city doesn't want to shut down a business, obviously, but are we going to be in a position to where now all that excess parking is now spilling into the neighborhoods and causing those types of concerns?
I just can't believe this is in front of us as we got to decide on this right now. It's a great idea, but there's just too many holes in it.
Approving this tonight, there's no public input from the neighborhood.
Nothing.
We're not gonna get the public input.
Right.
You asked for it.
Right. I just, I'd like to hear what everybody's thoughts are around it before we do something, else we'll get chastised for that.
So I know, downtown is under a different parking
It is.
thing,
Downtown's
but I know
different,
the
right.
businesses down there do the hours of operation shared, I think the Hub and Kelly's and others where if you're.
Because we have parking ramps downtown. And
Yeah.
It's a whole different ballgame. And, you're on the right path here. I think you're going to be able to get this done. I really do. We just got to figure out a way that you're protected and the city's protected and this neighborhood's protected. But you've got the right idea. I think you're going to be able to get it done. Plus, Mr. Haugen's going to tell us in about 10 minutes that we're all going to have autonomous cars and not need parking lots anywhere anyway, so.
Right, rideability, walkability.
My other question is, and I discussed it with Brad too, but the public parking at the 7th Avenue entrance for the Greenway, parking ramp is a public entity. The parking lot for the Greenway entrance is a public entity. Is there any ability to utilize the 22 stalls there?
Well, you already have more, and you already have, almost double what you need,
Yeah, we're not even parking on the street
Doesn't
yet
it?
either.
Well, but then we get into those timing issues of strictly at night versus things in the day.
Which I don't agree. Mr. Matichak, please.
Quick question. Is parking allowed on both sides of 3rd Street?
No. One side? It's a one-way?
It alternates.
It's a one-way, I know that, but is it allowed on both sides?
There's parking in front of the apartment building, and then in front of 3rd and 9, it's on the other side of the street. That's allowed.
Yeah, it actually does alternate, like when you come right from the downtown, there's no parking, and then when it widens out, there's some parking, and then I think it narrows down again with maybe parking on one side. It's really kind of sporadic in terms of on-street. But, when we talk about on-street parking and other facilities, just as a rule of thumb, when we're dealing with a site plan, we can't count I mean, just as the rule of thumb, as code, we can't account for on-street parking to supplement the required numbers for off-street. However, knowing the inevitable, people will park on the street. So it's just, you can't account for it on the plan itself.
The only reason I brought that up is that when they do spill out and that does happen, then you will hear about it. It's just like when there's a hockey game with certain areas, or when the Alaris charges $5 parking, people go park in the Johnson Edition, everybody's upset because they're parking all around their house and they have a ton of cars there. That's something that, a can of worms that could be opened up if the event is big enough where it spills out to have to do that.
What I don't want to come back to this commission is, why didn't we know about this?
Well, I think we're asking the right questions.
That's what I don't want to have come back. People say, yeah.
It's a little tough when we have to say, I was with him, I just thought there was preliminary approval, we're going to discuss this tonight, and then we'd come back as a 3-item, but we're not, so.
And again, it's a pretty unique process in code.
You're getting awful close to tabling here because of things that are known.
That's what we should do.
Well, I hate to, stop a business too, we're asking the right questions, but we're close to that. I would just say.
If I'm hearing you correctly, suggesting to table to work on those other aspects, but then also in terms of, we've heard, the neighborhood, to do notification or the neighborhood meeting or whatever process that would go through to get them involved.
I would agree. I think the owner should explore what options are available as far as getting more permanent and more hours on his parking agreements. Howard should be consulted about how we can make this more binding. And then I think there should be some notification, and I move to table.
Okay, all those in favor of tabling? Aye. Opposed? Item tabled. And Megan votes no. She did text me, she wanted to vote either. Okay. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, correct? The 2. So 4-2, the item. It's a struggle, it's
Who was the second opposition? Was it?
Megan,
Okay.
Miss Sandy, Ms. Rodkey.
Okay,
Both
thank you.
in opposition.
Thank you, just want to make sure we get it right.
You're welcome. In opposition of Kate. This has been one interesting night. Please, 4-6.
Ordinance to amend zoning map, Southern Estates Plan Unit Development, PUD, Amendment Number 13.
Thank you. This was mentioned throughout the past few months, but just the overall general area of development is the area in red, which is 40th Avenue to the south, 47th Avenue, 40th Avenue south is north, 47th Avenue south is south, we got the Drainway, and then South 19th. So if you recall, this has gone through a couple different iterations. We'll kind of go back to prior to the most recent approvals. So back in 2014, the southerly portion of this area was zoned primarily R4 with the north R1. That plan never went anywhere, so then it was subsequently changed. To the south half is all the different land uses that we approved for the independent living, memory care, some other types of residential development for sort of that community setting. So the amendment that's up for preliminary approval right now just deals primarily with the south half, so that's basically between 40th Avenue South and 44th. The developers now are looking at doing approximately, and these numbers in terms of total units are approximates now. This whole area to the north of 44th still remains one large platted lot. So the developer right now is just going through the request to rezone the properties, and then subsequent replats will follow on with master utility plans and all those types of things. So this is more of the 30,000 foot level of just the zoning itself. So the yellow is the R1. R3 is medium density with a maximum of 258 units, and I think if the math is done, it comes right in at 16 units per acre, which is our maximum R3. Two other minor changes that would accompany this PUD amendment. If you recall, we recently approved a new replat for the south half, where originally we had two outlots, one on either side of the main campus building. Then it was decided for ownership reasons that the lot on the southeast corner could go away because it was in the same ownership with the main campus structure. And then the remaining parcel in the southeast corner here just grew a little bit in size, so the land uses are the same. It's still the medical and other accessory uses for the original development for the south half. And this is just the overall PUD amendment. So with that, I would open it up to any questions, but just before I do that, to give you an idea of what it started at, and these are just to show you the numbers, but originally there was approximately 559 total units that were planned in this area before anybody else got involved with any other plans. So then with the existing R1 and R2, and now with the more recently approved development in the south, it's approximately 313 units. And now with the proposed rezoning to the north, we're looking at a total of 481 units throughout the entire site. Again, with R1 to the north and medium multifamily in the area of green. Again, this is preliminary, and notices did go out. We are going to have a neighborhood meeting for this development on September 12th at 6 p.m. in the City Council chambers. And those notices went out to, we did an approximate 600-foot radius to notify the owners. So we'll have that neighborhood meeting prior to this going in front of the City Council for preliminary. With that, I would open it up to any questions for now.
What is directly east? There's some fourplexes across from the R1. What's going to be what do we have zoned across from the R3?
To the east?
Yes. My old map doesn't show anything here.
Oops.
Oh, it's already built. What do we have built there?
Okay, so we have the drainway, which is the L shape. So directly to the east of this development is a higher density townhome development.
Yep.
And then to the south, we have more multifamily, some row house type apartments. And then further to the south, we have, of course, the All True South in the psychiatric hospital properties.
And then north, we have R1.
Yes, to the north, R1. And when we did the 600-foot radius, it took in a good part of this area north of 40th.
So what kind of density, those two eastern portions, what's the density in, just to give me some reference? Do you know by chance off the top?
Offhand, I don't know. But I believe they probably came in at probably an R3 density.
Okay.
16 units per acre.
So we'd have the buffer so we'd have R1 against R1 in the north, and we'd have R3 against the R3 in the south. And then we'd have R3 to that to that hospital on the south-south.
Correct. as well as all being spanned by the actual drainway itself, which is
Right.
a pretty good distance.
Okay.
Is there only the one access on the north, off the north side, other than traveling south through the new facility? To 40th?
In terms of basically how do you get from 40th to 47th, or?
Well, how do you get from the 258 unit complex?
Oh, well, because the plat hasn't been designed yet, right now this is just, again, the 30,000 foot, just the zoning. The subsequent plat that'll come in then will dictate the internal roadways, access. Ultimately, 44th Avenue is going to cross the drainway. So once we get an idea, once the plat comes in, then we'll be able to know exactly how traffic is going to circulate in and out of this area that's designated as R3.
Any other questions for Mr. Gangler?
Did you have anything to add?
Seeing none? What's that? Mr. Akers?
Brad, help me think about this. How should I think about this if, when I'm trying to decide as a planner, as somebody who's trying to plan a community, whether I should approve the R3 as opposed to R1 or 2? I mean, in our overall plan, our overall idea of making neighborhoods, of putting in buffers, how should I be thinking about this? Because I would prefer not to, in my mind, I'm thinking I would prefer not to have R3 there. I would like to have more R1 there. I think that would be a nice neighborhood there. We've got neighborhoods to the north, we've got neighborhoods across on the other side of the soccer fields. Tell me how I should be thinking about this.
I think as planners, we have to sort of, I mean, there's a time and place, I think, for that rationale. But I think in the bigger picture, I think from a planner's perspective, you don't always want to have just your one housing variety in terms of, a large scale area. I think it's healthy for the community to have a mixed use of densities, R1, R3. We're not talking about, high-rise apartments versus tiny homes right next door. And I think with all the amenities in the general area, with all the park district, properties, I think this just gives another opportunity for a higher density living, just in an area that is offering other services, in this case, all the services to the south. So I think we always try to at least keep, when we have the opportunity, to try to have a mix of different densities and different styles to make a more well-rounded community, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions, comments, motions, anything? Mr. Akers?
I'll move approval.
Second. Moved by Reichert, second by Mr. Budke. Discussion, further discussion? Seeing nothing, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries unanimously. So with that, reports from the planning department.
I will invite Mr. Haugen up for the presentation.
Parking study brief.
Where did it go?
It's under 5.1 if you go to post it to the web.
Go to what?
Post it to the web. P&D, yep, 5.1.
That's where it went.
Good evening, Earl Haugen, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm here to present some information regarding the parking study that we did. As you are well aware, the city has been working on a downtown action plan, and through the development of that plan, questions were raised how the parking situation is downtown for development, redevelopment of the area. And the report itself has an implementation chapter that focuses on these 6 items. Is there a way we can reduce this down?
Hit manage Zoom or not? I can't quite read what it says.
Add sticky notes, select tool, hand tool, marquee zoom.
I wonder if we set it to, whoops, not that far.
Yeah, a little bit.
There's an awful glare, so I'm not crazy.
That might work. There you go. That'll work.
That'll work? That'll work now.
We'll make it work.
Okay, sorry about that.
No, you can zoom it. You're on the right.
So it's focused around these 6 items, and you notice one on the very lower right deals directly with some recommendations pertaining to the Land Development Code, and that's a section of that staff and I are presenting to you tonight. The rest of it we are happy to go over with you at a later time if you want, but tonight we wanted to focus on just the Land Development Code recommendations. One of the key findings that we found is that there are over 3,600 parking stalls available to the downtown, and the dark number is representing the current occupancy of those parking stalls. So during an average occupancy, there are just under 40% occupied parking spaces in the downtown area. During the peak, it raises up to 51%. Still a lot of vacancy that's taking place in the current parking stalls downtown. In the red, we looked at what was being proposed for redevelopment, new development, and also a pretty wild, significant development concept just to gauge how much parking there is. So all of the developments you've heard about, they're factored into this. It's about a 10-year development growth cycle. And then on this lot C that you have here, we maxed out what your zoning ordinance could allow to be put there. And it's a rather significant high-rise intense use. And even with all of that development and all of the parking demands it would create, that we would raise the average occupancy to 65%. Still a lot of vacancy out there. And during the peak period, it would be at 61%. So again, it's telling us there's a lot of parking available versus the demand that is calculated through the matrices. So under that 6 bullets, the one bullet we want to focus on is really around the urban form. And that's what the Planning Commission and Zoning Commission is all about. It's really focusing on the center slide here, where under the current geography boundaries, there's 3 different types of zoning rules or development guidelines, if you will, that govern. Some of them govern on top of each other. Others, a piece of property can be adjacent to another and have a real different development outcome. And so we're suggesting that there be a uniformity of these geographies in your land development code.
Brad, which of these can be changed by, I mean, are some of them federal? Of these 3 things that are here, are some of them federal or?
The things that the commission would more than likely be involved is actually changing the zoning, DDRB regulations. We wouldn't foresee changing the historic, you wouldn't have the ability.
Is that the legislature that changes the historic district, or can the city do that?
No, I think there's a process through the State Historic Preservation. There's different details that are involved outside of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Because I agree with Earl. I mean, I think that would make sense if we could get some uniformity in there. But,
Yeah, exactly.
But I think there's some that we can't really do much about, isn't there?
Well, at your level, like we couldn't have the Planning and Zoning Commission just waive them.
But I mean, even the city, I mean, the city of Grand Forks can't change some of these, right?
I would say with the historic district, no. It probably takes a higher level or a different level of historic preservation, but things like parking assessment districts.
And the zoning, we could.
Those things, right.
Thanks, sorry. Sorry, Earl.
So over on the far right is a case study we did of 3 different properties, just to show you what the different outcomes would be if we did a common development of, say, 10,000 square feet on the main floor, and then 10 one-bedroom apartments on top, and what the different parking requirements would be. So we get a variation as to what would be required for parking on the sites, even though they're almost on top of each other. So, as already been discussed, and it's already kind of being worked through the process, is the incorporation of the Downtown Development Review Guidelines into the Land Development Code is one of the recommendations to get that uniformity of what happens in the downtown. There are other downtown action plan recommendations regarding urban form that are coming through that planning process that we're reinforcing in this parking study. And then the last one is getting after the maximum consideration of a parking maximum ordinance. These following slides give some sense of where these are getting support out of. The first one, and I do have to explain the public support. That public support is a dot exercise that we did where we asked the public to place dots on these various proposals that they favored. And so simply by saying 15 to 26% of the 300 dots that we received through our public feedback, that's what support these had. The public was more engaged with increasing the pedestrian facilities, increasing the biking facilities, increasing the wayfinding facilities. They were much less enamored with these things such as zoning ordinances and development guidelines. But the committee had great support for making the uniformity. The parking maximums, we also included some text out of the draft report itself and talked about that with all of this parking that we have that's vacant, we still have developments taking place that are even adding more parking than probably necessary. So for the downtown area, it seemed to make sense that you have a surplus. Why allow developments to create even more vacant parking spots? And that urban form is getting back a higher and better use of that surface parking into actual buildings and development. So those are the 3 things that are coming out of the report that affect the Land Development Code, and we wanted to make you aware of those things. We haven't finalized the report. If you have some feedback that would allow us to make this report better, that would be awesome. And then if you want to go on any of the other pages of the document and give feedback on that, we're welcome for those. But that was the essence of what we were trying to achieve tonight.
Appreciate it. Very clear.
Thank you.
There was some talk a couple of meetings ago about a form-based code perhaps being incorporated into the B4 district. Has there been any movement on that?
That's a city question, not a...
Sure.
That's why I backed away.
So there was going to be like a baseline of information from a consultant.
Andrea can kind of give you an update on some of the more recent discussions with the consultants?
It's pending, I guess is the simple answer. The Downtown Action Plan consultants have put some drafts together for us that we just received last week for staff to kind of review and start that feedback with them. So in the foreseeable next few months, I will probably be bringing something forward. That's the short answer, I guess. I don't have anything definitive to share or anything like that, just because we aren't there yet. The deadline or the timeline got pushed out a little bit just due to other constraints with the consultant, so that's the reason for the delay.
And that's probably the same answer that we had to give you last time you asked.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Any other business? Item 6, I'm on.
Nothing else from the planning staff.
With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn this thing. Mr. Cood. He finally gets one. Any second? Mr. Budke. Meeting adjourned. God bless America.
Thank you for being with us tonight. This meeting has been brought to you in part by
Let Grand Forks International Airport help you start your next vacation off on the right foot. Grand Forks International Airport offers flights to the sunny destinations of Orlando, Las Vegas, and Phoenix on Allegiant, and connections anywhere in the world through Minneapolis-St. Paul on Delta. Forget the hassle of long drives, parking nightmares, and stressful check-ins. The convenience of flying locally means less headaches and more time for you. Grand Forks International Airport, your airport, simply grand.
Know what's in this box? Well, in case your crystal ball is broken, here's a hint. Safe, reliable energy, for starters, but there's also a commitment to this community. See, at Xcel Energy, this is our hometown. So we're not just about making a living here, we're about living here. Oh, I wish I had wings.
In our community, we're always delivering. Xcel Energy, responsible by nature.
Chris Young, live, Raised on Country Tour.
I was raised on country.
October 3rd, Alaris Center. Chris Young, hit after amazing hit.
And tonight I'm drowning.
With special guests, Eli Young Band and Matt Stell. Tickets on sale now at livenation.com or ticketmaster.com. Chris Young, Raised on Country Tour.